like many Americans, some of us here at the Global Lane are taking a few days off. So in the meantime, enjoy this show. It's a compilation of some of our favorite segments from recent weeks. Israel's recent military skirmish with Iran and Hezbollah in Syria focused world attention again on the Middle East. Could it lead to a bigger war between the Ayatollah and the Jewish state? What's Donald Trump's plan to prevent a big regional conflict there? Does he even have a plan? What about North Korea? After the big show of unity at the Olympics, will Kim Jong-un resume his threats and missile launches? Could that lead to fire and fury on the Korean Peninsula? Well, joining us is Dr. Hal Brands. He's Distinguished Professor at Global Affairs at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. And he's author of the book American Grand Strategy in the Age of Trump. Dr. Brands, does this president have a grand foreign policy strategy, or is he just kind of winging it?
I think he has a series of basic geopolitical beliefs that he's had for 20 to 30 years in some cases, which mainly add up to the idea that the United States should not play the role it's played in the world for the past 70 years, since World War II. Because when the United States acts as the primary provider of international security, when it anchors the international economy, it simply allows other countries to free ride and to exploit the United States. And you can see this on the president's views on things like alliances, free trade agreements, and other issues. But he's had a hard time translating those views into a coherent program of policies, in part because some of the president's own views are contradictory, but also because he has surrounded himself almost by necessity with a group of advisors who really don't share his view of international affairs at all. And so the result is that you've had an awkward and unstable mix of what you might think of as the president's America First impulses with the more mainstream or traditionalist views of his advisors.
Well, I want to get into that a little more in a little bit here, but I know the president has worked hard to draw Sunni Arab states into a quiet alliance with Israel against Iran. So what do you think of that strategy? Is it a good one?
I think in theory it makes a fair amount of sense, and it recognizes that there is more strategic convergence than divergence between Israel and many of America's Arab partners, particularly in the Persian Gulf. But unfortunately, the way that this administration has gone about it has sometimes been counterproductive. And so the example I would give is the way in which the president at least seemed to be egging on the Saudis and the Emiratis and going after Qatar back in June 2017 at the outset of a standoff that's persisted to this day. And the idea was that doing so would force the Qataris to get serious about cracking down on financing of terrorism and force them to distance themselves from Iran. But unfortunately, it's had precisely the opposite effect. It's pushed Qatar closer to Iran because Qatar sees itself as having fewer geopolitical options these days.
Well, and the recent shoot-down of the Israeli F-16 fighter jet and the IDF airstrikes on targets in Syria, how likely are we to see more of this in the future? What should the U.S. response be to prevent a big regional war in the Middle East?
So I think we are quite likely to see more of this in the future because as ISIS is defeated, particularly in Syria, the various parties to that conflict are going to be reminded of the fact that they dislike each other almost as much as they disliked ISIS. And so certainly there's going to be continuing tension between Israel and between Iran as Iran consolidates its position in Syria. I think one of the major problems in U.S. foreign policy these days is that the United States is going to find it hard-pressed to restrain actors in that conflict because it's quite clear that we don't actually have a coherent Syria strategy at this point. So you have had the Secretary of State, for instance, say that the United States is going to leave troops in Syria more or less indefinitely as a way of pushing back against Iranian influence. But you've had the Secretary of Defense say that the United States is starting to draw down its presence in Syria. And it's not at all clear that even if the United States were to leave 2,000 to 3,000 troops in Syria, it would be sufficient to take on Iranian influence in the country. And so this is a case where I think you've seen a fairly incoherent U.S. policy that's unlikely to bring about the result we might like.
Well, more of what you're saying, conflicting views within the administration. Regarding North Korea, the president's fire and fury comments were not well received by diplomats around the world. But is taking a hard line against Kim Jong-un a good strategy, one that will lead to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? What do you think?
So there's a bipartisan record of policy failure on North Korea over the past 25 years. And so this was inevitably going to be a problem that the Trump administration had to confront. And I think that the administration has actually done some fairly constructive things. They've been fairly effective in ramping up the diplomatic and economic pressure on North Korea through additional sanctions, for instance. But I think there are two basic problems. So one is that the president sometimes can't seem to get out of his own way. And so when he gets up and talks about fire and fury or totally destroying North Korea, it has the effect of switching the focus from the destabilizing actions that North Korea is taking to the destabilizing rhetoric of the American president in a way that is not helpful. And the other problem is it's just that it's not clear whether any president would be able to solve the problem of North Korea if solving it means getting to complete and verifiable denuclearization. North Korea has clearly decided that nuclear weapons are the ultimate guarantee of regime security. And so I'm not quite sure what the level of pain we would have to inflict on them short of war would be in order to get them to give that up.
How can Americans remain safe from terrorism, drugs, and criminals who want to do harm to the nation? Yes, we want to protect our nation, but at the same time, Christ calls us to be good Samaritans by reaching out to strangers, the lost and hurting, the tired, the poor, huddled masses yearning to be free. Well, last summer, I traveled to Greece, where I found Christians there viewing immigrants through the eyes of Christ. Instead of rejecting them and treating them with disdain, they embraced them and changed their lives. I'm standing on Mars Hill. This is the very spot where the Apostle Paul first introduced the Athenians to the gospel message. He talked to them about their unknown God and then introduced them to the one true God. 2,000 years later, evangelists are still preaching the gospel here, but instead of traveling long distances like they did during the time of Paul, those they're hoping to reach are coming to them. They're coming by the tens of thousands. Refugees and migrants fleeing war and hardship in their home countries, seeking refuge and a more promising future. Greece is their first stop in Europe.
I came to Greece with no purpose in mind. Not for money, not for wealth. I just want to forget what happened to my children. I want to live in a safe place and forget my children.
In 2015, a sniper in the Syrian civil war killed Amal's husband. A week later, while still grieving his death, she traveled to see her sister.
I left my sons at home and went to visit my sister, who lives 7 hours away. Her husband had just passed away. I went to comfort her. ISIS members came in the house at night while my sons were sleeping and slaughtered them.
Traumatized, Amal left the hurt and heartache of Syria behind. She made her way to Turkey and then Greece. Alone in a strange land, Amal, which means hope in Arabic, soon lost hope.
I have no one to talk to. I feel like my head is going to explode. I cannot sleep if I do not take a sleeping aid. I'm not used to being alone. I'm used to having my sons around me.
Around that same time, other refugees found a caring family at the Apostolic Evangelical Church of Thessaloniki.
We saw that need coming to our door, coming to our city, and we had to react.
As a part of that outreach, a volunteer named Katie approached Amal.
I sat down next to her and I hung her and I said, "It's okay to pray with you in God?" And she said, "It's okay."
When Katie saw me, she hugged me and helped me. She took me to church where I showered and she gave me clothes. When I visited the church on Friday, I felt so comfortable and I slept that night without taking a sleeping pill. I was so happy. I loved the program. Everything I heard was so true. It's all in the Bible. It was a happy day for me.
Afterward, Amal underwent an operation to remove a spot on her liver. She then told CBN News how the experience grew her faith.
It's true that my children were taken away, but God stood by me when I needed Him during the surgery. After surgery, my connection with God became stronger because I got to the church more often and I could trust God. This is the only thing that matters.
As a result, Amal made a big decision, then demonstrated her commitment to Christ.
I was baptized because I trust God so much.
The United Nations placed Amal in an apartment along with a Muslim family. Although she would prefer to share housing with a Christian widow like herself, Amal told us she wants God to use her where she is.
I want to show God's love to others here and be an example to people. I'm praying that I'll forget my pain and experience a new, healthy life full of joy.
And after visiting regularly with Amal, her new friend Katie is optimistic for the future.
Amal means hope. And I think nothing is by chance. Yes, I think there is hope for hope. There is hope for Amal.
American society is facing greater pressures from the left to redefine masculinity. A new movie just out called 12 Strong received some criticism from journalist Peter Maas, who tweeted, "It's time to wage war against war movies that glorify outdated models of masculinity." And on campus at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, a student-led project is targeting culturally defined and toxic masculinity in hopes of reducing sexual violence on campus. Well, joining us now to talk about this and other developments on some American college campuses is Hannah Scherlacher, program manager and opinion writer at Campus Reform. Good to see you again, Hannah. So tell
Good to be back.
Tell us more about this redefining of masculinity at the University of Tennessee.
So this student group to deconstruct masculinity is just the latest example of the war on masculinity that we see all the time at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform on college campuses all over. Duke University this semester is launching a 9-week program dedicated to destabilizing toxic masculinity on campus. And we see hundreds and thousands of dollars, student fee dollars and taxpayer dollars, poured into courses, workshops, and programs aimed to strip men of their masculinity.
And these aren't liberal campuses. I mean, Duke and also Knoxville, University of Tennessee. I mean, you'd expect them maybe at Michigan, Ohio State, Madison, Wisconsin.
It's just absurd. The same movement that seeks to promote equality and empowerment for women is the same group that is telling men that the very core of their identity is flawed. Men and women were created differently with complementing different features and gender roles. This should be embraced. We shouldn't be seeing one gender as the enemy and one as the positive one. This is a failure in society to treat it as such. You know, a functioning and healthy society embraces the difference in gender roles. College campuses need to stop this anti-male rhetoric, or we can only expect a society where we see more broken homes and broken families.
And as people are mourning and dealing with tragedy, I know last November, after that Texas church shooting, a professor at Kutztown University blamed toxic masculinity, not mental instability, for that massacre. So why this cultural war on men being men? Your thoughts?
Well, lamenting toxic masculinity is not empowering for women. It's a way for some women to blame all men for the mistakes of a few. There is nothing flawed about the core and identity of men. You know, denying masculinity and denying manhood deprives men of their unique role as protectors and providers in society. Without that, it leaves men out in the cold questioning, who am I? We need to stop stripping men of their identity and start embracing the differences between men and women. This has to start on our college campuses if we want to see a productive and functioning society in the future.
Hannah, the cultural war is also against women who take a stance for values, and more recently, those who march for life. Tell us about that.
So a professor at the New School sent out a series of tweets essentially telling all women who attended the March for Life to sit down and shut up. This is the opposite of women's empowerment. You know, this professor is essentially saying, if you don't think exactly the same way I do, then sit down and shut up. You are unworthy of being part of the conversation and incapable of thinking for yourself. This is the opposite of women's empowerment. When I think of women's empowerment, I think of President Trump's cabinet with more women elected to high-ranking positions than ever before in history. I think of women who attended the March for Life, who marched on behalf of the voiceless and the vulnerable. What I don't think about are those who claim to champion the rights of all women, except for those who are pro-life or conservative. And
I'm sure you and millions of other women were offended by that. And Hannah, 1 week before President Trump's State of the Union address, your colleague, Cabot Phillips, asked students at NYU what they thought of the president's speech. Again, this was before the State of the Union speech was delivered. Here's a shortened version of that.
What was your reaction to everything that was said?
I didn't watch it because I couldn't bring myself to watch it.
Quite racist at the very least, if not up there with most racist.
Yeah. Wow. It's already quickly climbing the scale. Some of the people said today that they thought his immigration stance and that he outlined last night was especially hateful.
Very offensive.
What do you think of it?
It's something that I wouldn't have expected to happen in like our lifetime.
It's offensive. It is crazy, but I'm not shocked by it, by what he's done in the past. So
pretty ugly. I believe what I'm hearing about his rough nature and the hate that he probably said.
He told the Democrats the wall got 10 feet higher because they didn't stand up and give him applause at one point. What do you think of all that?
It's the behavior of someone who refuses to accept accountability for their failures.
The way he acts, you shouldn't be acting like that if you're the leader of the country, regardless of what party you're in. So that frustrates me a lot.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that that was his State of the Union address.
Hopefully everything that he's outlined can be overturned by the public opinion.
Again, Hannah, that was 1 week before the State of the Union. Were you surprised by this? What does it say about students on campus in 2018?
Ironically, liberals pride themselves on being open-minded, but many of them are so quick to form their opinions before learning anything about the topic. And what's most outrageous about this is that college students at some of the top universities and colleges in the nation have no idea what or when the State of the Union address is. The State of the Union is probably one of the most important events of the entire year, where the president lays out our priorities for the future and the current state of our nation. But instead of learning important things like this, students are learning about toxic masculinity and feminist dance theory. So this is just the result of the echo chamber mentality we're seeing on so many college campuses.
A Michigan State University professor says white people practicing yoga are racist. A paper co-authored by MSU religious studies professor Srina Gandhi says, quote, cultural appropriation of yoga is a continuation of white supremacy and colonialism. And some researchers are now suggesting that, contrary to what the Dalai Lama says, meditation does not make people more compassionate, less aggressive, or less prejudiced. So is the way white people practice yoga racist? And although meditation and yoga have roots in Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, is it okay for Christians, regardless of their race or color, to practice yoga? Well, here to set us straight is Christian yoga instructor Kristy DiGeronimo. Kristy, thanks for joining us today. So what do you think? Is it racist, yoga?
I have never even thought about that. Never. I've never given it one thought. But I will say that the practice of yoga is evolving over years. The history of yoga is convoluted. And although we know it did come out of India, as it's come to the West, you do have lots and lots of middle-class white ladies out there practicing yoga. That's
a lot of them.
Yes, that's how you see in yoga classes often. But I wouldn't say it's racist. Of course not. If you really adhere to yoga principles and, of course, Christian principles, you should become more compassionate and less racist, if anything.
So it does have a positive effect.
Oh, I agree totally. In my own life, I've seen it. I could go by my own experience saying yes.
Okay, now you're a Christian.
Yes.
And you know, it's very controversial. Some Christians say, oh, we shouldn't be involved in that Eastern religion. It's a practice that was started, as you say, India by Hindus and then Buddhists, as Buddhism came from Hinduism. What do you think? Should Christians be involved in yoga?
Well, obviously, since I'm a Christian, I've taught yoga now for 15 years. And I did have a problem with it in the beginning. I will say that. I did.
What was your problem?
Well, same thing you're saying, that was the concern that you'd be exposed to things that were, spiritual principles that were contrary to Christian practice and beliefs and get sucked into maybe worshiping deities that you weren't even aware because of the chanting in another language. And so I had a shoulder imbalance, and I thought, I am sealed by the Holy Spirit. I'm going to go and try this, because I was feeling for quite a while that God was telling me to do it, and I kept saying no. So I finally went. I trusted a teacher, and I went to the class. And over time, I felt that I was closer to Christ on the mat because of the quiet, because of settling down your body and your thoughts and your heart. At the end of class, I would say, "What would you like to say to me?" And Christ would come to me on the mat and just spend time with me there. So over time, I was convinced by the Holy Spirit that it's all about your intention. If your intention is to be in that state, you will be.
So finally, what should Christians look for? If they're going to be involved in yoga, what should they look for?
I've been at this so long, I honestly don't even think about it much anymore. But I would say that if somebody's trying to engage you in a place where you are connecting with your own divinity, because we believe that, we're not pantheistic. We don't believe that God is everything. We believe that we are creatures, creations. So if you are directed to say that, I am God and I am that, and boy, thanks be to God, I am not God.
Get out of there.
Get out. Yeah. Or seal yourself and say, I can't. Take what you can and leave the rest. Or just take yourself to a place where you know you are safe inside.
And let the Holy Spirit guide you.
Let the Holy Spirit guide you.
What's your view on marijuana?
Legalize it. Yeah, I've never gotten in trouble back when I used to smoke cannabis sativa, but I travel a lot around the country, and it seems like the places I travel to, the people are a lot nicer, a lot more chill. So,
I'm back and forth on it. I haven't really seen a lot myself as far as proof to say that it's completely dangerous or anything like that.
I believe that it definitely has medical purposes, and I feel like it would be something that could definitely be legalized for that. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I know they just legalized it up there, so I don't have a problem with it personally. I think that it's fine if it gets legalized. So it's not heroin, it's not cocaine, it's not a strong drug like that.
What's your view on marijuana?
What is my view? Well, me, I said more of a help. I think it's more helpful than harmful. And
do you think we should legalize it? Because Virginia is not right now. Do you think we should legalize it?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Very.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Marijuana. For those that don't mind smoking it, power to them.
Do you think we should legalize it in Virginia?
It's one of those things, it's a catch-22. You know what I mean? There are enough people smoking it anyway, legal or not. If you're going to smoke it, at least do it legally.
All right, thank you.
I don't know. I don't really care if other people do it so much. I think the research has shown there's, like Sanjay Gupta talked about it, and he said that it doesn't affect brain development after the age of 25, but there's signs that it does affect before then.
Well, do you think we should legalize it?
I really don't have any opinions on it whatsoever. I guess if you tax it and use that money for something good, then it makes sense, but I don't really have strong opinions either way.
What's your view on marijuana?
That's the best thing in the world. That's what keeps everybody together for real.
Okay. So you think we should definitely legalize it?
Yeah, it decreased the crime rate. The best thing. Because when people don't smoke, people is aggravated because of the stress of the world. Yeah, so more people that smoke, less crime. Hey, vote for that.
Oh, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Marijuana. I don't know. I think it has a lot of good health benefits. I've seen it help with epilepsy as a recreational drug. I don't know. Honestly, I don't do it. I don't smoke. So, I know other people do, but I couldn't really tell you because I've never tried it. But I think it definitely does help in a lot of ways with health and cancer patients, and it can relieve a lot of pain and stress as well.
Do you think, Virginia, we should legalize it?
It's a tough question. I really don't know. I feel like I would have to really think about that.
The world has bid a final farewell to America's pastor, the Reverend Billy Graham. Before he was laid to rest beside his wife in Charlotte, North Carolina, thousands of people stood in line at the U.S. Capitol to pay their last respects. Graham was the first religious figure to lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, a fitting show of respect for an American who changed millions of lives and was beloved by people around the world. From the Global Lane, we pay final tribute to one of the greatest evangelists the world has ever known. And we offer some personal thoughts and reflections. As a child, I first saw Billy Graham on television. The seeds of salvation were planted in my heart.
You come right now, quickly. While every head is bowed in prayer and the choir sings softly just as I am, hundreds are already coming from everywhere. You come with us.
In the 1960s, I joined my parents in a civil rights march down Saginaw Street in Flint, Michigan. I later learned that Billy Graham had already insisted on racial integration and unity at his meetings and crusades.
But when God looks at you, he doesn't look on the outward appearance. The Bible says he looks upon the heart. Don't ever say it's a white man's religion or a black man's religion. Christ belongs to all people. He belongs to the whole world.
In 1974, when I started my career as a disc jockey at Flint radio station WKMF, we often would broadcast a Billy Graham program called The Hour of Decision.
We are told to make our messages relevant. There's nothing more relevant than to proclaim the unsearchable riches of Christ. The methods of presenting the gospel may change, but the message never changes. God is unchanging.
Later in the 1980s and again in 1990, I had the privilege of meeting and talking with Billy at CBN's Washington Bureau and at Germany's Berlin Wall. Although he met, prayed with, and counseled every American president since Harry Truman, I got the impression that Reverend Graham wasn't really concerned about politics. I think he viewed it as a distraction. Yes, Billy Graham had only one thing on his mind, and that was telling people about Jesus. And like Mother Teresa, he treated everyone with the same respect. Government leaders were treated no differently than the poorest of poor. Why? Because Billy viewed people everywhere through the eyes of Christ. He didn't see the color of their skin or their position in life. He looked deep into their hearts. He believed that every human being had a hole there that needed to be filled, a longing and a desire to know and be close to the Creator, the one who gave us life. In his final newspaper column, Billy Graham said he wanted to be remembered as someone who is faithful to God, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and faithful to the calling God gave him, not only as an evangelist, but as a father, a husband, and friend. Billy, you were America's pastor, our friend, and we'll miss you, but we know that when you passed into heaven, you were likely greeted by Christ with the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Well done indeed. And Reverend Graham never missed an opportunity to invite people to receive Christ. The last two lines of his final newspaper column are this: do you know you will go to heaven when you die? You can by committing your life to Christ today. Like Billy Graham, may we all answer the invitation, so when our life ends, we can join him in heaven and hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Follow us on Facebook, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.